I've got some news.
They've called a truce and they've decided to go home.
Just fill us in, X.
The episode begins with a teacher named Mr. Perkins giving a lecture on survivalism, how to live when all modern conveniences like cell phones and microwave dinners are gone. He concludes this lesson by eating a cricket, which grosses everyone out.
What? That was great.
That could have been one of us.
Rachel, party pooper extraordinaire. Everyone leaves class, and we learn that Perkins merely palmed the cricket because a 2-year-old watching this might have cried or something. A few minutes later, Marco spies Perkins drenched in sweat and clearly in pain. That or Perkins uses dollar store deodorant. Perkins goes to an office in a sickening fit and calls someone and tells them something that's never made clear, so I won't dwell on it here. Marco tells the rest of the Animorphs about Perkins, and Rachel reflects that it was weird for him to go on a survivalist lesson. I guess it doesn't fit in with whatever class Perkins teaches. But you know what? That's nothing. You should have seen some of the tangents my teachers used to go on. I had an English teacher who once spent 40 minutes ranting about Social Security when we were supposed to be talking about To Kill a Mockingbird. Anyway, a girl walks into the cyber cafe and starts spouting on about how she's free from the Yerks and how you should be free too. You know, at least the free controller in number 8 the Alien tried to warn people about Yerks with a bit of spirit. This girl is just wandering around aimlessly from her house to tell people to fight the Yerks with no context and all the energy of a stoned Burning Man participant. You could perhaps get away with saying that in the TV universe, when a Yerk starves out of your head, it makes you delirious, which might go a ways to explaining crazy Fran's behavior in episode 13, had they not established in the capture two-parter that it's nothing like that. 2 guys scoop the girl up before the Animorphs can reach her. We cut to Visitor 1 via hologram, berating Visitor 3 for his performance in general, and his handling of the Controna shortages specifically. We learn that Visitor 3 has been shuttling up priority Yerks to the mothership to use its pool, but Visitor 1 calls him an idiot and tells him that he has one more chance or they'll just fucking kill him. You don't often see Visitor 3 taking Visitor 3 style threats. Thankfully, Visitor 3 has an alien beer can to vent his frustration on. At the barn, the Animorphs learn that news of a super flu has been going around, and while this usually means that Randolph flags are coming, the Animorphs speculate that it's a cover story by the Yerks to explain the number of crazy freaking hosts. Now, you might remember back in the Leader two-parter that Tom had mentioned something about the installation of a new Chondrona, which could have meant that either a second one had been put up or the original one had been replaced. It would seem that a Chondrona starvation crisis wouldn't happen in this situation, since they either would still have the first Chondrona, or they could patch up the old one and reinstall it as a temporary fix. This is not an issue that one would expect to be addressed on a show like this, but...
You know, the Chondrona was the Yerk's main energy source. Maybe they're getting sick without it.
But we destroyed the Chondrona weeks ago. Why is this just happening now?
That was not the only Chondrona. Perhaps the Yerks have been using another source that is finally broken down.
Hello, continuity, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again. Okay, it's not an explanation, since we'll never learn what happened to the original Chondrona, if it wore out or was attacked by another force, but at least it was brought up. It's nice to know someone was paying attention. This gives the Animorphs some hope, since if enough people start wandering into cyber cafes and muttering about the Yerks, then the world would have to take notice. Tom's starting to show flu-like symptoms, but in a bit of reverse Ferris Bueller, Tom insists on attending sharing functions and piles into a minivan. Jake has been getting hyper-emotional over potentially getting Tom back, to the point where he runs out into the street and...
Tom, come back! I'm not gonna let you go! Oh, I know everything about you and the sharing! I know everything!
Whoopsie! Well, for no reason properly explained, the car drives off after the commercial break, and Jake pursues it in Dogmorph. There, he discovers Perkins, who has recently become freed of your control, tying Tom up and force-feeding him soup, with intent to starve the yerk out of Tom's ear. Man, the yerks Tom gets have the worst luck. The first one gets starved out of Jake, and now this? Tom is the jinx that keeps this invasion from going forward. Jake is thrilled by this and tells everyone about it at the barn.
Perkins has Tom.
Perkins is a freed controller.
That's great. How'd that happen?
Well, I don't know. All I know is that I saw Perkins make Tom soup.
Perkins has Tom tied up in his shack in the woods, and he's taking care of him till the yerk dies.
Yeah, I think you should let Marco keep the spokesperson role there, Jake. However, the Animorphs realize the ultimate truth of the situation, that Tom would have to immediately go into hiding once the yerk is dead. Jake suggests Tom just fakes it, but...
But he's gonna have to go back to the Kandrona. He'll never make it through the sensors.
Couldn't keep that up for long.
Oh shit, more continuity. Is it my birthday? The Animorphs start discussing getting supplies so that Tom can go on the run once free, though Axe remains cautious over the whole situation. If this were the books, realistically so, but we're talking about keeping away from the TV yerks. Unless he's particularly susceptible to lassos, I think Tom would do okay. The next day at school, Jake tries to thank Perkins, but can't find the words to do it. Marco says he wants to do the same, but that they need to be realistic. It kind of feels like someone switched Marco and Jake's typical roles, with Marco being the rock that's keeping Jake from getting too emotional in the situation. I actually like that, though, as it suggests a friendship that is based on each other seeing the similarities in each other's situation, that when one of them gets caught up in a terribly emotional moment like this, the other can recognize it and bring that person back down to earth. It's a different relationship than what we see in the books, but it's still a pretty good one. However, things take a turn for the worse when it's discovered that Tom had somehow escaped, and now the jig is up for Perkins. He makes a run for it, but gets caught, and Chapman informs Tom that Perkins is to be destroyed instead of reinfested. Why, that might bring the total amount of deaths brought on by the yerks up to 1! Thankfully, Jake and Marco were there as Tiger and Wolf respectively, and managed to get Perkins free. Tom and Chapman bring the news of Perkins' escape directly to Visor 3, and they all come to the conclusion that the Andalite bandits have been using the school as a front and begin to discuss a way of bringing them out of hiding, setting up for the season finale. Jake meets up with Mr. Perkins in the woods, and they thank each other for what they tried to do. Perkins heads off into the woods to never be seen again. Post-episode follow-up. One thing Annie-TV focused on that the books never really covered was how people outside of the Animorphs handled the Yeerk invasion. The Animorphs were not the only humans to know about the Yeerks. The chat room in number 16, The Warning, was proof enough of that. But the books never really explored those avenues, never asked, what's their story? No longer needing to stick to a first-person narrative really freed up the series to explore these kind of things. And I think that's when the series really shines, when it shows how inventive and interesting it can be when it builds on the books. We saw this with the expansion of the crazy Fran character in episode 13, and we see it here with the struggle of Mr. Perkins. It's world-building in a way the books never ventured. And it's really a very solid episode. There's not too much new to object to. All the problems with it are problems with the entire series. You know, the general incompetence of the villains, the lack of suspense, and misguided attempts at comedy are still there. But this episode feels crisper than most. The continuity is tighter, and it feels like there are real stakes involved, even if the stakes are just a single man's life. While I still call episode 5, The Visitor, my favorite of the series, since it was nearest to the book's style and atmosphere, this episode is a very, very close second. While it feels like the quality of the series has been gradually ramping up, The unfortunate reality is that this episode is the last semi-decent one of the entire series. From here on out, the series jumps onto the cuckoo crazy train heading towards what the fuck did I just watchville. We have 2 single episodes and 2 3-parters after this, and all of them suck. But let's leave the future for the future. I give the release a 7 out of 10.
Andalite, when are you going to stop hiding behind your pathetic morphing powers and show yourself?